Our next topic is called perpetual check. In perpetual check, one side, which is usually down a lot of material, tries to give check forever, and if the opponent can't get out of it, then the game is either a draw by 3-4 repetition or 50 move rule. To illustrate how this happens in games, let's take a look at this following example. Right now, it's white to move, and black's up a lot of material. In fact, white only has a queen, while black has a rook, a bishop, and a pawn extra in addition to this queen. So here, white would definitely be happy with a draw, and now he will play the move queen to h5, check. Now, the only place for the king to go here is to come to g8, and now white can try another check. For example, queen to e8, check. Here, black can only play king to h7, that's his only square, and then it's easy to see that white can just come back with queen to h5, repeating the position. Once again, black's only choice is to play king to g8, but then after queen to e8 check, king to h7, and queen to h5, we have 3-fold repetition. Now, not all checks are perpetual checks. For example, if white tried queen to h1 check, this unfortunately does not lead to perpetual check. Black will play king to g8, and white can try again to check with queen to d5 check, but after king to h8, and if white plays queen to h1 check again, black has the move bishop to h7, and now black manages to escape the checks. White has no more checks that don't lose his queen, like queen to 8, for example, loses his queen because it's guarded. So white runs out of checks here, and black survives. Black has extra material, and black will definitely win this position. So from this position, it's best to find the move that's the most forcing, queen to h5, and with this series of checks that black can't escape, white will be able to save the draw. Let's look at the next position. In this position, white is once again down a lot of material. White has 1 rook and 4 pawns, while black has 2 rooks, 2 pawns, and a bishop. It looks like black is up a rook and a bishop for 2 pawns, which is definitely a decisive amount of material. However, in this position, white also has the perpetual check for him to use. So, in this position, if you want to take a moment and pause your video to see if you can figure it out, go ahead. Okay, the correct answer for white to play here is to move the rook to e7 check. The king squares here are very limited. The king can only go to d8 and e8, so we can play rook to e7 check, the king can only go to d8, and then if we play rook to d7 check, the king can only come back to e8. The king can never escape the checks because these are the 2 squares that he's confined to. So after check, 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 and 1 more check, this becomes 3-fold repetition. Notice that from this position, we can see that the king is limited to these 2 squares. Because of that, the rook easily comes in and can find a perpetual check. Now in this example, white is also down a lot of material. Black has 2 rooks and 2 pawns, white only has a knight. So if we could just count the points, 5, 10, 12. So black has 12 points, white only has about 3. That's a lot of material. However, it turns out that white here has a tactic, the perpetual check, that he can use. Now a lot of people will first go, hey, knight c7, it's a fork. It attacks the king, attacks the rook. So when the king moves, we can take the rook, and cool, we win material. Now while that's true, we notice that black is still definitely winning here. Black still has a rook, and even without these 2 pawns, the king and rook together can give checkmate to white's king. Therefore, the only way here for white to save a draw is to avoid the fork and look for a perpetual check. So after knight to c7 check, the king comes to a7. White must avoid taking the rook on a6. We notice that the king, the black king here, only has these 2 squares to go to. So then we can play knight to b5 check, forcing the king to come back. Since the king has to go back, knight to c7 check, king to a7, knight to b5 check. This repeats itself, and after knight to c7 one more time, once again we have 3-fold repetition. Black's king can never escape this check, and now the position is going to be drawn. Moving on to the next position, we can see that white here would definitely like a draw. In fact, white does not even have any more mating material. All he has is a bishop. Therefore, white could try to find some perpetual check. It happens that this time black's king is a little bit more free. Black can have this square to go to. This square looks like it could be a flight square if the bishop leaves. But the main thing is we need to prevent black's king from escaping from b6. For example, once he comes to b6, he can go to c6 or any of these squares, and then black's king will be free. Notice that we can only give check on black's king if it's on a dark square. So now we need to constrain the king to the dark squares and prevent him from moving out. We also need to give a check right now because otherwise, if we don't give a check, black can give his checks of his own. Therefore, we need to play the move bishop to d8 check. First of all, this stops the king from coming to b6. Second of all, the king has to go to b4, which turns out is another dark square. Now, the king's flight squares on a3, b3, and c3 are covered by our own king, so we only need to worry about the c5 square for black to escape to. Now, the answer here should be simple then. We just play bishop e7 check again, and now the king can't come to c5. This check, once again, forces black's king to come back to a5, and we can see here that after bishop to d8, this series of moves will keep repeating itself until we have, in this position, a threefold repetition. Once again here, we need to notice that black's king is indeed short on squares. Black's king really only has 2 squares to escape to, and this one, the b6 square, is definitely a better flight square than the b4 square. Therefore, we play bishop to d8 check, we cover that square, and we force him to come to b4, and then we repeat moves over and over again. Now, in our last position, we can see that white is still down 2 pawns. Now, it might not seem like, 2 pawns is a huge amount of material that white needs to give a perpetual check. However, we must agree here that if white doesn't give a perpetual check, black is going to be better. In that case, why wouldn't white take the draw, right? So in this position, we can try giving perpetual check. Looking at our check options right now, it seems that none of them really work. We can try some, for example, knight to h7 check, but after king to e8, after like knight to f6 check, king to d8, it seems like we've sort of run out of checks. Like rook to d7 doesn't do much. He just plays king to c8. So it looks like black can get out of all the checks. He can also try rook to a8 check, but after king to f7, it seems like the knight has to move. The knight can go to e4, but once again, black's not even in check anymore. White can also try knight to d7, but after king to e7, this looks like it could be a powerful discover check, but in reality, this is not really going to win white any material. In fact, probably the most white could win is the a6 pawn. So in this case, white cannot find a perpetual check immediately. However, we notice that if the problem with knight to h7 was his king will come and escape this way, the best idea for white here is to play rook to d7. Now, why do we go to d7? Well, first of all, we cut the king off from the queen side. Rook to d8 is now, or king to d8 is now not possible. And second of all, rook to d7 is a square where the knight can protect it. So therefore, when it comes and checks and comes back, the knight on f6 will continue protecting the rook on d7. Let's take a look at how this works. Now, there's nothing really black can do. He can give check, but it's not going to do anything. After king to f2, nothing happens. There's not really much to prevent the check. He can't stop knight to h7 check, and he can't really get his king into the king side, or into the queen side, sorry. So after, let's just say he plays rook to b5, threatening the fork on rook to f5, we can directly go with knight to h7 check. Now, black has 2 options. Black can either play king to e8, attacking our rook, but after we play knight to f6 check, the king has to come back to f8, and here he will not make any progress. Now, if black decides to move his king to g8 after the checks, so let's say he goes to g8, then we can play knight to f6 check again, and now, if he plays king to h8, then he gets checkmated with rook to h7. If he plays king to f8, then once again we have threefold repetition. So in this position, we first need to make a quiet move in the beginning. One second. Make a quiet move with rook to d7, and after the rook cuts the king off from moving off to the queen side, then we can start giving check with the knight. Perpetual check is a useful tool, especially if one person's down a lot of material. If you're up a lot of material, you need to also make sure you're aware that your opponent doesn't get perpetual check.